Room in the world for all these poems? Drift, occupy, stand still for advance, pick up the poems and leave. Where? Begin to bubble up exactly the poem trips you once could. Way the poems married, encourage, establish their own laminates, thought you said. Poems not for hire, thread of. What were you thinking of as a noun, a verb for kicks? And also, it's natural. As the pills slide, might as well and good, the having to do about all this and still too loud. It rises in hallways and on the way to the zoo, an only rentable cosmos. Be okay, piece of clunk, nervy roots, forest of white snakes, might be cool, land under poem rule. They only go home to school for meetings. The poems were left in the lake, the lurch. There were benefits, strivings, the hollow poem unstrung, the untapped poem among the lost. He put his tuba up and called on Walt Whitman. He could see it coming. A lube job, prosodic tuning, a certain lending textiotomy. You heard growls, vocal leers, a wild lack of conversation. Your parents had once harbored a poet. For all my efforts, but he doesn't write poems. 3 old fellows sat late, poem faulty. Mr. Joy wrote an octet. Doesn't qualify. Wheat in the fields, fish in the river, no poems. Sure this slanted light ever got into a poem? Poems were a drain on the town, expelled. Mr. Dick wrote that hostile poem, attacked him. Read this poem, you'll never get out of the building. Read this poem, you'll never get out of the building. A representative of the one poem may piss you off. The poem called Death Rules Like a Diving Hand. Poem with a beak, poem is a drill. The poem you call to correct. Poem called Here Comes the Catch. Mr. Waits calls this poem his new home everlasting. This store will provide all your poem needs. A red light goes on every time the poem. Just what is this poem doing anyway? The moon is missing, suddenly said the poem. The ant place features its own colonial poem. The poem that's open whenever you need one. The poem that shows you that. It shows you the poem. Shows one the form. If I were you, I'd answer the poem. Imagine a poem that can observe and learn. All of us down at the poem thought you'd be stopping by. There is news from the poem machine. Ever see anybody pull up in a poem? Silly. Exactly why it is not in the poem's nature to reside in an old shoe or brown balloon. An old cocaine shoe, elastic entablature housing, where the poem meets certain standard mores, and then you will see where the poem. Livery stable blues on early homespun poem makes noises like a parlor game. Sorry, we can't help you. Our poem is broken. The poem in place of what? After what? Thought the poem always belonged to others. Could you come in to discuss the poem? Don't know what else the poem could have been doing. Gets in and floors the poem. So much sleep activity in the poems. The poem returned for insufficient body. So stick up the poem and run it through. Screams of the featured poet, etc. Plucked, says help, and now. Must we hang here while the poem is running away? Show me, doesn't show, makes no odds. A poem like paltry wine, captured ginny poem. Opens the latch to tomorrow, a try and cry poem. All the ones that now will never be written. Ascends the wall and out of the poem occurs to him a set to nature poem. Too many have been squashed beneath the ambulant poem. The poem is dead. A giant egg, then a skeleton of a poem comes rushing right in. You play the xylophone with an axe. Objects of the poem, in this case, a chained lizard, too huge. He makes a scraping, a fight of it all, is dragged out by a one-eyed ape. The lizard does a dinosaur turn. The princess of the poem is drawn into all this. Interior of the poem sucks up the lizard's pain, tries the poem sorely and dashes off in the gross tactics of the slighted poem. Spider-Man pinch, a tacky Magna Carta. I'm cold, says the poem on guard duty. The planet of Seagrams comes free. There's always an attendant poem on tap, that Baroque epic of the Jersey dumps. The lid of the poem feels heavy. Imagine the drop, the scrim between us imprints the poem. They may follow unknown pints, lapses in flooring, unstable toots. Why should anyone speak the language of this poem? Where is it from? How will it do? Innocent parts foremost, the rest are locked. A piling on of the poems raised on salts, a poem of colored lights in daylight, a flat planet, a poem where no one speaks. How did it go that was never here? Got any Zarex left? So be it. An advanced poem, this time by rote, written with a pick from the Zen pencil box. The apes had all left for another planet where they could chew in peace, practicing a sort of naked mercy, planet of whatever the hell you're talking about. Gruff as a poem can stretch, get into that bra and haul away. And education is too mental to massage. Now just where is this landscape you describe? The poem falls back into itself again, starting from Ouroboros Plaza. Does a poem dawn on you? The poem comes to a head of a serpent. This is a case study of the adopted poem, maybe lately acquired, while standing around looking at stones. Granted, the poet put it all down, assembled in boxes, packed for the train. Hell are you doing? The poem, 14 inches long. His mother's 12 years old. Svelte colon. Ventable spritsky like a cat accident. Overall brachiopod collapse. Once was private, now cosmic proportions. Had to call it. Without a tap, you'll never know. Just what I thought. I'm headed out. Call your handlers to the nines. Let's be there. A computer sack rises. Cat named Brody wrote the poems down. How many more rooms can there be? Just woke up one morning and handed the poem. Trial of Moby Dick, the untouched inside of the poem. And where do we go from here, there, where? For a time, poems were glassed in. The rest of us lived in the desert, holy Montserrat, diverted by delicious black and white photography. The boat's keel entered in evidence. Globules of blubber spattered all over. The poem was faulty? Says how? Made me feel like a Christmas cake. There are holes in the sky just like that. No point in running from otherness. Can't tell about old Moby. What if there were no white ice, no dark night, no tassel hanging from the poem? Not even an entrance to it, and inside no shape. Poem like a grenade in the cupped hand. Beseech, and there come the bouncing people. A stone with legs, they tell you, drive on, you'll make out. A collection like a whole summer of tooth decay. Poem that comes closer like a picture. A flap at the back holds data. Comes to a pretty, past the poem. I sorted out the snow from its syllables so it all would stop. Where does anyone come home from being what? This is a stone you could see in a cave, the night diamond. Hang up. Now go home and look under the stairs. There are the notorious answer diamonds. There are some towns where stone does not exist. You don't believe? Consult the gem table. What if the poem tells you send in the shucks? Structured like rocks. Such a turnaround made the poem do it. Must be unbalanced. Poems like sheep all over the rock. Hear that? A poem is coming through. Thread, needle, and then what? Writing a poem. He picks up a shovel. Now do you see how it works? The poem to Paula Diego. The poem of its own snarl, the poem of removal and shares, the poem that leaves you to line it up, the poem that runs short on the long march, the poem that walls are not enough for, the poem that takes a snap, the poem that includes quicksand, the poem for which, of what, the poem that loses its bearings, the poem that firms up squat, the poem of lethal advances, the poem of cruel quizzes, the poem that stops when you do. Thank you.